Guys, I'm in Needham at the Teak Design Group build, and behind me you see all the swooping roofs come together. I've literally never seen a roof built this way. We have these site-built trusses that our structural engineer had specified. I want to walk you through all of the complexities, and so why don't we go inside and we'll do that. Before we do go inside, I do want to call attention to this. So LVL right here, people talk about how curves are more expensive, right? This is a perfect example and one of the reasons why curves are more expensive. This right here is an offcut from a rafter that was cut out of a larger LVL. Now in the middle there, it's about the size of a 2x8. Now if I were to guess what the size of that rafter is up there, it probably has to be roughly about 8 inches, if not bigger. Meaning that 8 inches here, which was cut out of it, there's another 8 inches here underneath, and you're cutting that rafter that is a 2x8 rafter out of a 16-inch piece of material. So that's one of the reasons why curves and adding curves into architecture does become more expensive, because you're buying lumber much larger ultimately to cut out a smaller piece of material out of. And then these offcuts here, they're stacked up nice and neat, which leads me to believe that we'll find some use for it. You know, this is a small section of a swooping roof that ties into the larger section, and that's really where all of those site-built trusses are. So we're gonna climb up in the attic so we can see them from the inside. But before we do that, we'll start on the second floor deck. So this is actually a great view. So we're standing on the far right side of the home. There's actually a couple bedrooms over here, and then we have our garage actually behind the camera. But looking up at the back of this, these rafters actually stop short of this wall here. And that is because you actually have a flat ceiling, and then this turns into a dormered gable on the back elevation here. But let's just talk about the way that these are constructed. You actually have this LVL right here going up to what I would consider your peak. And it's actually running much lower than the peak of the home, and that is your primary carrying load. That's an LVL. They're spaced 12 inches on center, and it goes up and actually connects to an LVL on the opposite side. Now that's your lower roof section, and that's really where most of that weight is being carried. And again, this is kind of dictated by our structural engineer. But then on top of that, you can actually see we have a traditional KD material, and it's all sandwiched together with this 3/4 inch plywood, basically gusset. But if you look beyond where it curves, you actually, all the way up, you have this 2x8. And it's almost as though you have a triangulated roof with a lower pitch. Then you have this other triangulated roof with a much higher pitch that sits on top of those LVLs. And then what you're doing is you're actually bridging the flat part of the roof on the upper section to the flat part of the roof on the lower section by cutting out a curve out of a 2x12. So then you're putting it all together, and you're getting this really nice subtle curve all the way up to what I would consider our aesthetic ridge point. But you'll actually see a lot more kind of detailing of that when we go up into the attic. So up in the attic here, we've actually tucked in a attic hatch in the laundry room, so that way it's not impacting any nice bedroom ceiling or stuff in a closet. It makes it really accessible. We get plenty of room in that space. So basically the roof that we're talking about is right here. And what we have going on, actually not really afraid of falling between these joists either because they're so tight together. But here is our LVL. And then we have that plywood that is sandwiching that additional piece of KD that goes all the way up. You can see how it comes up and it actually intersects with the front LVL at a much lower elevation than the actual peak. Now this right here gets overlaid with our front gable. Our gable is going to tie into this, but this is going to be our structural member going up, and it ties into this LVL here. Again, at a lower elevation. What we got going on is our front roof, our back roof, and then we need to have this gradual curve up to our peak. So if you can imagine that this is cut and this is our peak, we're coming down flat here, and then it's flat down here, and then we're bridging that section with a curved piece, which is that piece of 2x12 that was cut on an angle. So essentially, again, you have a flat roof front, flat roof on the back. You're coming down with your secondary 2x8 up there down to this intersection point where everything's sandwiched, and then you're bridging again that flat spot to the flat spot on the lower with that curved piece. We have to look at this in a number of different ways, and one of the things I had proposed when I was on site, I saw them laying this out on the floor, and Mike actually said the same thing. He's like, I wish I could build this out of one piece of material. and they laid it out, and I'm like, well, how wide is that? How wide does that rafter have to be? Because as you saw out front, we're talking about a 16-inch LVL that gets cut into a 2x8, right? Because you're cutting that curved section out of it, and you're ultimately ending up with 8 inches of framing material so it can support the roof, but you have to do it out of a 16-inch piece of LVL. Now, what if we were to do this on the back? Well, that radius is 48 foot something. So a really big radius, and when they laid it out in the length of it, and actually increases its curvature as it gets down, how wide would that have to be? And ultimately, I think it was somewhere around 36 to 48 inches. It was wide, really, really wide. And we had called our supplier, and they said, no, the widest LVL that they have is a 24-inch LVL. So ultimately, we knew that this was gonna have to be put together in sections. So Mike, working with the structural engineer, as well as obviously the guys from Chevcon, doing all the framing and the muscle on site, came up with this solution. And then furthermore, as you saw in the last episode, they actually took these trusses and built them on the platform out back, which is a killer detail. You're allowing everything on the inside the home to kind of continue with wall layout, interior walls, and all the prep work for the roof while they're pre-manufacturing these on the back. They're stacking them up. They had a crane day. The crane came out and then picked all these things up and then dropped them in place, and then you really get that nice repetitive nature. Again, I've never seen a roof built this way on any residential home. Typically, if we're using trusses, we're ordering them from a factory. So it is really this hybrid approach, but it's also a lot of design build and working with our team, the team at Teak Design Group, the team at H&O Structural Engineers, the guys at Chevcon, and of course our team here, all coming together and figuring out how to do this. Not only is it complicated in order for us to achieve these architectural details, but it's also super robust. I mean, we're talking LVL, we're talking 12 inches on center, all of these things. And I want to address some of the comments because a lot of you guys are like, oh, it's overbuilt. That's part of our job as a general contractor and as a builder, especially for our client. We want to make sure that we aren't overbuilding things just for the sake of it. Is 12 inches really necessary? Do we really need to be using LVLs? And that's where Mike really comes into play. And he pushes back on the team and makes sure that, hey, these are necessary requirements. These aren't just being done to overbuild anything. We want to build a really great house, a home that's going to last for a really, really long time. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we're not overbuilding it for the sake of overbuilding it. And at the end of the day, this is what the team came up with after multiple iterations. It was the most cost-effective way to do it, and it was going to achieve the best result. And when we talk about best results, that's everything when it comes to our decision process. The best result should always win.